probably the most well-known ecosystems of the world. And I don't know if you know the fact, but both of them started with something quite near to Spain, which is oranges. Both San Francisco and Israel at first started their economies with oranges, uh, also Spain. So let's deal, sorry, uh, about how to change from oranges to investment. So first of all, I would like to get an insight about who are you and what are you doing in Israel and in San Francisco.
Yeah, thanks, Javier. So, as for myself, as I mentioned before, I'm from Argentina. Um, being living in San Francisco for over 10 years, but working in the technology sector over there for over 20 with startups based in well, Mountain View, Excite, and Yahoo, for example, and working here in Europe as well with those companies. And my connection now with Desafía, which is the institution I'm representing right now, it's a program from the Spanish government, sponsored by ISEX and Red.es. And what we do is bridge Spain and Silicon Valley in San Francisco.
Cool. And what about you, Moises?
Yeah, so hello, I'm Moises, originally from Madrid, but I moved to Tel Aviv 20 years ago. I spent most of my career at Accenture, and then 5 years ago I have my 40 years old crisis. I decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I have the idea of launching the floor as a technological platform for tier one banks looking to engage with Israeli talent. We have practices in Tel Aviv and also in Hong Kong and Asia in general. And this year we started together with IFEX and Red.es, we started also with Desafía Tel Aviv. It's a similar program than the one in San Francisco.
Yeah, we have a similar thing compared to our interests as well, because I mean I have a similar background. I worked before going into the technology sector for Price Waterhouse.
Okay.
And I was bored at the time. And so I was contacted by a private equity firm, a German private equity firm that bought the company in '99 just to have a due diligence. And by then what they did is, well, I just ended up being the CFO of the company. And we had an exit actually in Hong Kong, basically. So
Nice.
similar.
Nice. So, guys, I would say one of the most interesting thing about those ecosystems is that are quite different to Spain about the size of their entrepreneur ecosystem, number of startups, investment. Could you give us an overview of the main characteristics of the ecosystem and also what are the main strengths?
So Israel is a very small country, okay? It's the size in Spain of the Valencia region. 9 million people, but it's called the startup nation. So in Israel we have around 6,000 startups cross industry that last year raised around $6.5 billion.
Let me stop here. Last year in Spain, Spanish startup raised like 1 billion euros. So it's 8 times less than Israel.
And this year we are going to close with around $8 billion.
Yeah.
The high-tech industry in Israel represents around 50% of the exports of Israel, 50, and around 20% of the GDP.
Cool.
Okay, so it's the key industry for, in Israel we don't have natural resources, so the key natural resource of Israel is the talent of the people.
Yeah, in fact, I was having a conversation with a guy from the government and they tell me, Javier, we only had like people and stones, so we have to build an economy on top of that. Yeah. And what about San Francisco? I guess Silicon what? Silicon Valley? It's
Yeah, one of those things. So yeah, so actually Silicon Valley is I would say just a misnomer of a particular region. Usually when you live there, we never really talk about Silicon Valley, we say the Bay Area in general. And the counties surrounding the Bay, the San Francisco Bay, the population is about 8.5 million. And the GDP of all those counties is the size of, just to put it in context, the size of Sweden. So just alone would be the 15th economy in the world if we take all those counties together. So as you can imagine, it's not only technology. So you always heard about Google, Facebook, and so on. But there are lots of other industries that are super powerful, like oil, for example. So Chevron is based there. Visa, for example, financing. So there are lots of other industries. So it's not really a unique thing. And if we talk about technology, obviously, I mean, we are talking here about a very specific ecosystem where you have three pillars that depend on each other. One obviously is venture capital. The other, which is super important, is education. So we have two very good universities, Stanford and UC Berkeley. And the third one is the entrepreneurs itself. So you probably heard about the PayPal mafia.
Yeah.
So Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman, and so on. So basically, this is a reinforcing ecosystem that feeds on existing entrepreneurs with capital, know-how, and so on.
This is probably one of the most interesting insights of the panel at this point, which is probably the self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you have nice exits, big companies, their early employees and their founders create another thing, and that fosters the ecosystem.
Yeah.
One question. Imagine I'm a Spanish and a European entrepreneur, and I'm thinking to going to Tel Aviv or Silicon Valley because there's so much money and there's so much talent. Why would it make sense for me to go to San Francisco and Tel Aviv, and when? Because for me it's very important. I have decided to create my company. I'm 6 months in the market. Will it make sense for me to go to each of these ecosystems?
I think it doesn't make sense for any European entrepreneur to go to Israel.
It doesn't.
Doesn't make sense because
Cool.
Israel is a very small market, and if you want, I mean, it cannot be a go-to market for any Spanish entrepreneurs. The market is very small. You need to localize to Hebrew, but for me, Israel should be like a training camp. Okay, you go to the gym, so you go to Israel to learn from best practices, learn from investors, learn from Syrian entrepreneurs. You can spend there a few weeks like we did at Desafía Tel Aviv, and then you can come back to your country, in good shape after going to the gym. This for me could be the greatest value for Israel. Most of the Israeli investors and VCs who are investing in Israel, they only invest in Israeli entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So if you are coming from abroad, it would be very difficult for you to raise money in Israel. I think maybe in Israel could be good if you have already a very big company, like Apple, Microsoft, etc., and you want to build an R&D center, yes. But as an early stage entrepreneur, is mainly to learn from best practices.
And what about the idea that Israel is the gate to the Asian ecosystem, to gate to China investors, and so what's your take about that?
So today, more and more, Israel is becoming a bridge to the Asian market, especially to China. That's why also we have offices in Hong Kong and now launching as well in China as well. But again, it's mainly focused to Israeli entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a gateway to meet people and investors from China. At the floor, our investors are coming from Asia. And during the Desafía Tel Aviv, we spent 2 weeks in Tel Aviv, but also 1 week in Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And the week in Hong Kong and Shenzhen was more focused on learning how to scale up in Asia your business. Yeah.
And what about the Valley?
I share Moise's appreciation for Israel. We have the same philosophy. We think that in order to tackle the US market, in particular Silicon Valley, you have to be prepared. You are really competing I would say in the La Liga.
Yeah.
So if you want to be there, you have actually to go through places that are easier in order to train yourself. I mean, you're gonna get there, but I mean, that training, it's a lot more efficient if you do it back home. I mean, do this training over there, it's obviously possible, but it's super expensive. The Bay Area is very expensive place.
Very expensive.
Very expensive,
Yeah.
very competitive, and there aren't really that many people that do that. I mean, on the first run. I mean, you see, I think about 70% of all entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are foreigners, but those people had previous experience. I mean, not in the first run.
I think this is a very big difference with Israel, where 99% of entrepreneurs are Israelis, and 90% of them are coming from elite units from the Israeli army, so not coming from the academy. So the academy in Israel is not very important. Okay, you have like 4 or 5 elite units from the Israeli army, where all the entrepreneurs are coming from the same units, and the investors only invest on people coming from this specific unit.
Because they build relations prior to joining the companies.
First of all, to get access to these units, you need to be like a super talent guy. And they know that, if I've been going to these units, so the army is doing like the human resources for filter for the investors. It's like I would say the biggest incubator in Israel.
Yeah. Let me go back to what you mentioned before about the reinforcing thing. So what I've seen in my over 20 years in Silicon Valley is that, before when I was an entrepreneur, we didn't have a framework, really to grow a company there.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing now, there are very well established patterns and key takeaways how to manage a company. Back then, for example, in my case, I had an MBA. I worked for Pricewaterhouse. So basically, what we did is whatever we learned at school, we thought of a big company. We made it small.
Yeah.
And the paradigm today is completely different. And why I'm saying this is, I see this evolution here as well in Spain. So now, those best practices, we are using them here as well. So there is really no need to go to San Francisco. Maybe 10 years or 15 years ago, yes, because this was novel there. You didn't have this here. But here now you have a whole lot of support systems in order to go through all this training here. And then once you're strong, go over there.
Cool. So my next question will be, what kind of companies would make a nice fit for those ecosystems? For example, regarding San Francisco, would it make sense for a health company to go there to raise funds and to get access to customers, or what do you think?
Yeah, so I think you have to separate between, for example, biotech companies. So San Francisco, in particular South San Francisco, which is a part of San Francisco, is a very strong biotech hub. So you have, basically the biotech industry was born there.
Even though the guys from Boston say that
I know.
theirs.
I know. Obviously Boston is a very good choice. No, of course. And the problem with if we're talking about medtech, for example, it's very tied up to the regulations, and that's the difficulties. You can have an idea how to do that, but the problem is, you have to know how to deal with the FDA, the rules, regulations, and so on. So this might be a place where we didn't see a lot of traction with the companies that they go through our programs. But another case where I see that, for example, many companies struggle here is in particular high growth B2C companies.
Yeah. With a deep focus in product, because one of the things I have discovered is that in several ecosystems here in Europe, there's not a culture of supporting product-focused company. They are looking for the early revenues, and so it's something quite different to the Valley, I guess.
Correct, exactly. I couldn't agree more. What I always see is that investors in Europe and many in Spain push the companies too early and to focusing on cash flows and not really growth. And so people in Silicon Valley do this completely differently. It's not that they throw a whole lot of money at the company without any KPIs or anything.
Yeah.
So
in Israel, for instance, most of the startups that raise already $50, $100 million, they're not going to see many revenues in the first 5-7 years. So, and there's a very strong focus to B2B, less to B2C, because Israelis always, since the market is very small, they always think global from day one, but they always think more to the corporate level.
Yeah.
And you get delegations in Israel from key corporates every day. Here in Spain, for instance, Santander is one of our founding partners, maybe one of the most active banks in Israel. So I think the B2B factor is a key differentiator from Israel, especially in our area in fintech, where in other countries we see a lot of B2C going on.
Regarding money, let's focus there. One of the biggest complaints of European entrepreneurs not focus on the biggest hubs like London and Berlin, complain about the lack of resources of investment. It seems like both Tel Aviv and San Francisco, there's so much money flowing in those startup companies. What's your take about that? It's really a huge difference on the funding side. But before answering the question, and what's the comparison with the cost of engineers? Because, for example, they say in the Valley, okay, you raise 1 million pretty easy, but you spend that million in 3 engineers, 4 engineers. So How does compares it to the cost
I wish it
structures?
was only 3 engineers, probably less.
I think in Israel you need to be a very lazy entrepreneur, not to raise the first $5 million. Really lazy entrepreneur. If you are coming from the right units of the Israeli army
Yeah.
and you have the right team, really to raise the first $5 million, that should be normally in Israel the seed investment. This should be very lazy.
That is happening because VCs know something that local VCs in Europe don't understand, or is it because the competitiveness of the industry?
First of all, it's just because of the team, so they're not looking for the technology itself, they are looking for the team.
Yeah.
Normally in Israel, you're going always to see one of the co-founders as a serial entrepreneur, and then the other co-founders is their the first venture. So the VCs are betting on the serial entrepreneur that they know from other initiatives as well.
Yeah.
And I think in Israel, people are very self-confident. In Israel, it's called in Hebrew, it's called chutzpah. So people, they believe they can do anything and they can raise and they can sit in front of any VC and show them their vision and their dreams and convince them to invest. There's a little of a bubble, I think, going on as well. But so far,
I didn't say bubble. You say.
yeah, there's a bit of a bubble going on, but I mean, everything is growing already for 20 years.
Yeah.
So in the 90s, Israeli startups raised $20 million per year in total. Now they're raising $8 billion in 20 years. So
Moiseés said something interesting about the lack of ambition. So I would like to get your insights about the funding part, but also about the lack of ambition. What's your take about that?
I mean, I wish, VCs would think that way in San Francisco. I mean, going back again to how the venture capital evolved in the last 20 years that I've actively seen is, during the 90s, late 90s dot-com bubble, it was relatively easy to raise a Series A with a PowerPoint, basically. So no business plan, anything. Series A, so basically not even product. They were basically, a Series A was financing a product. That's completely unthinkable now. I mean, the Series A is pushed way, way back. In average, I would say a Series A is raised now a company that has 3.5 to 4 years.
Wow.
I mean, the KPIs, especially if you're thinking about a B2C company, B2B company, I mean, and SaaS and so on, so the MRRs have to be majestic and not only strong, but also with a clear path to the future. So this created basically before the Series A funding up, because every year it was pushing back and back. So before you had, the seed financing and angels. So now you have pre-seed, and now you have a bridge financing between seed and A, because everything is being pushed and being more fragmented. So it would be impossible to raise 5 million, which would be perhaps a Series A or a smallish Series A in Silicon Valley, just with a PowerPoint
And that's something probably that has to do with the size of the market, because yes, there are lots of money and there are lots of investors, but the big issue here probably, and I would like to get your insights about that, is that, for example, Spain as an European country, it's like 47 million people. It's so huge, the USA, but
360.
the nice thing about the Israel is that they don't think about Israel. They do care about the global. So, in fact, they target really big markets.
So they think global from day one. So Israel is not their target market. Actually, it's funny because if you go to Israeli corporates, they don't use almost any Israeli startups. Okay, so all the Israeli startups are always exporting all their technology. And the fact that you think global from day one, especially the US, the UK, now APAC in general as a market, so you have all the world in front of you. So it's a huge potential.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you also the lack of ambition that you asked before. That's super important, because what we see working with Spanish entrepreneurs, I think we are our own worst enemies. We think too small. As Moiseés mentioned, people in Israel, the same thing in the US, they think going big. So, I think, if we manage to do that and have also a venture capital industry that supports that, everything is possible here.
So, I don't think we have much time. So, a final remark or insight you would like to share with the audience about, for example, we haven't time to deal with talent and so. What's your insight about that? How will you share with the audience?
So, I mean, Israel is a very, I would say it's an island, it's a very peculiar market, okay? All the markets are, fighting for talent. In Israel, we don't have a talent program. I mean, we have every year thousands of people coming from these elite units of the army, so you have around 2,000 people every year going to the private market.
Yeah.
So we don't have we have a continuous flow of talent, so the talent is not a problem. I would say that with my experience at Desafía Tel Aviv, I would say that the main difference I see between Israel and Spain is that as a Spaniard, so Spanish people are very strong in technology. They are very strong in operations. I would say the COO role is very good. The CTO role is very good. But then the VP sales, marketing, and CEO role of startups, I think they still have a lot of room for improvement, especially when it comes to raise money from investors. And of course, English is always a challenge in Spain. But this is, my case.
Final tweet format.
Be bold. I really believe there are lots of opportunities here, but be prepared as well.
Okay. So thanks a lot. We have run out of time, as my cell phone is announcing. So big applause for the panelists, please.